Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into the mailbag. Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we are going to be answering your questions. We reached out to the audience, reached out to the followers, and said, hey, what kind of Devy questions do you have? Really, anything, Dynasty, C2C, whatever you got. We got some good ones. We got at least one very difficult one that is going to take some dissecting and strategizing to figure out. But yeah, we got some good questions. I'm very excited to dive into that. But first, of course, I have to check in with Aaron. How are you doing tonight, buddy?
Great. It's always great to hear also from our listeners and folks who just want to learn more and or get some questions answered. So excited to get to that tonight.
I wonder if we'll get a live question from Toronto Dave. Of course, he's in the chat with In Beth We Trust. For obviously, Devy Devotional is brought to you by Optimus Fantasy. Today, Optimus was doing an Ask Me Anything, an AMA on Reddit. And I saw one of the questions and somebody was like, what the hell is Beth? So they had to go through and explain that. Unfortunately, I had a busy day at work, so I wasn't able to take part in it. But it was just funny that somebody was like, what the hell's Beth?
They're about to find out, that's for sure.
Goddamn right. So we're going to be answering some questions, but like I said, sorry, drop the mics in the chat as well. He says, we want Beth. Listen, everybody wants Beth, obviously. We're working on it. We're behind the scenes. We're trying to get all these tools and everything running on the website. But I'll tell you what, Beth is working her ass off in this draft that Aaron and I are in right now. And man, I'll tell you what, doing a listener league with two co-hosts from different Devy podcasts is not the best idea that I've ever had, because I have never been sniped so much in my life. I have listeners of the podcast. I have co-host of my own podcast. And everything in between. I have Patreon members that have my own rankings and are using them against me. And I'll tell you what, I have never been sniped so much in my life. It is, I'm miserable. I'm putting on a strong face right now, but I've been taking a beating, and just say I think you guys are lucky that I'm here right now, because I kind of want to just curl up into a ball and cry.
Yeah, and I'm working hard over here. I'm working against the machine that is Beth to take it down, and we're grinding. But yeah, no, it's super fun. I mean, drafting with some sharp folks, that's for sure.
Yeah, and we're only now we're about 15 rounds in, but I think we're gonna probably dissect that one maybe on the next pod. Once we're a little further in, we can really see how these teams are taking course and everything. But right now, 15 rounds in, I mean, we can get a good idea. But I figure, let's give it a little bit of time, give it a couple weeks. We'll probably be done, or probably not. Actually, the way this draft is going, probably won't be done, but we'll be pretty well in, and we'll have a good idea of how the teams are matching up there. So why don't we go ahead and dive into the mailbag? I love that video. I'm just gonna play it randomly. Like, we'll be in the middle of a sentence. I'm just gonna play it. But
gotta love little Kendrick. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we like I said, we reached out. We asked the listeners, we asked the followers for some questions, and we got some good ones. The first one coming in from a fellow C2C boy themselves, one of Aaron's co-workers over at campuscanton.com, and it's Austin Nace at Devy Deets on Twitter. And this is a tough one. I'll tell you what, we're starting out tough. He asked, who's a player you love who you could see having an awful season this year? And I mean, just the question itself is just so difficult because you really have to take like your ego completely out of everything and just say, okay, I have to be really real with myself right now and, really think about this. And I'll tell you, I don't know if it was difficult for you, Aaron, or not, but I'll tell you what, it's not that I didn't find a player like rather quickly, but like convincing myself that I was actually going to talk about this player was maybe a little more difficult.
Oh yeah, it's super difficult because you like players because you think they're going to do well. Typically, you don't. Yeah, you wouldn't pick a. I don't know. It's just very hard to pick a guy that you like a lot who you think is going to flop. That's basically what it is, or think is going to get surpassed or injured. Something along those lines. So I'm very interested to see who you went with here, John. Why don't you tell us which is
Well,
the guy that you love, but you could see having an awful season?
first, before we do that, speaking of someone that I love who's awful, Felix Sharp's in the chat, and he says that the pod is no longer monetizable. Yeah, that's a word. So we appreciate you always looking out on the business. Felix is always looking out for the business side of things. So appreciate you. And Felix is making guesses as well. He says, yes, give us your Dorian Singer, John. Oh, all right. Let's see if it's Dorian Singer. I do not think it's Dorian Singer because I think that Dorian Singer is going to have an amazing year. I honestly do. I think, I have made some lofty goals of 1,500 yards. I don't know that I actually think that he's going to do that, but I think he's easily going to break 1,000 yards. I really do. So I don't think that would truly apply. Although if he had asked this question last year, it very well could have applied at least to the season that Singer had. No, this year I am going with London Humphreys. I love London Humphreys. I love everything that he did last year. He's transferring up technically, even though he's going from SEC to SEC, but he's transferring up to Georgia. They're so deep at all the they're so deep at the wide receiver position. Carson Beck is a good quarterback, but I don't know that he's this amazing quarterback that's going to push the ball down the field and like really like gunslinger mentality, like that kind of thing. And that's really more of what London Humphreys is, unfortunately, for Humphreys. He's that down the field, get you 20, 30 yards on one reception kind of guy. And I don't know if it fits perfectly with Carson Beck and with what the Georgia's going to be doing. Now, that being said, I think that if anyone was going to take more of the Brock Bowers role, who's going to be that guy? It's going to be the most athletic guy on the team, London Humphreys. So I think that there's a chance that the team could use him properly. And then, like they could use him inside, outside, use him more on gadget plays as well, scheme him up, that kind of thing. And then he could have a great year. But if they're just strictly putting him on the outside and making him do go routes, maybe it's not going to be quite the year that I'm hoping for. And we have to wait for another quarterback to come in another year. Dominic Lovett goes to the NFL. A couple other guys move on. So I think that London Humphreys is going to be good. I think he might even be great. I love London Humphreys as a player. I see a realistic scenario where he's not amazing this year. And so I think that that's probably my best answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair answer. I am slightly surprised, but at the same time, like you said, it's a tough situation to break out into, especially as a transfer. So he's a young enough player where he has a long career ahead of him. Don't panic too much if he has a solid but not so spectacular season. But I tend to agree with you with this pick. I actually thought you were going to go with maybe a quarterback, Jalen Daniels, Kansas, just because the guy's back. I mean, I know you've always really liked
that
him.
That one
as
seemed
a
a little too easy.
Yeah, his back is just not really cooperating with him. So I think that might be impacting his upside in his career. But I don't know if you're going to like this guy that I came out with. And maybe I shouldn't have picked a freshman because how much playing time does any freshman get, or freshmen are just not guaranteed playing time in general. But I actually think that Taylor Tatum could be a guy that you and I both love. Um, as a player, Taylor Tatum going to Oklahoma, true freshman, number one running back in the class amongst some of the top recruit services. I could see him just not doing much at all, or just not being very good as a true freshman. That does not mean he will not develop into a very, very good back, but I'll tell you why. Just because Taylor Tatum is coming into college now, I think within the last week or two, he's been playing baseball, and he has just not been training for football. He's not in football shape. He is coming in behind the eight ball with some established guys there, or at least some talent there in that room. It's not like it's just completely barren. Gavin Sawchuk certainly has shown that he can step up, and I think they are going to utilize him pretty consistently this year. Whether you think he's a true NFL prospect or not, he still is a explosive back, and he can handle a solid workload. And there's other guys there too. And I think that Taylor Tatum, he's coming in lighter, it seems. I've been seeing some rumblings that he'd be more like 195 pounds, and that's smaller than anticipated, right? Because I've been looking into like the baseball, and that's where he's listed everywhere this spring, baseball wise, at 195. So that doesn't mean that Oklahoma is going to have him listed that way. But if he's coming in 5-10 pounds lighter than what we were expecting, because he's been focusing on playing baseball, his game there, instead of bulking up and getting strong and explosive for the football field, just a little different focuses. He needs to, maybe get a year under his belt of training with that training staff, with the weight room, and really get a good feel for the offense before they're going to actually want to ride and trust him. So I think Taylor Tatum is my selection, as much as it hurts, because I think you and we've both been on board with him as the RB1 ultimately in this class. But I do think it's going to be kind of a slow burn with him initially.
I mean, I guess I didn't even know that he played baseball. Honestly, I didn't care to know that. I guess it is important. I probably should know that, but he was listed at 205. So if he's coming at 195, that's a pretty substantial difference there. And I mean, honestly, like the way that I created my recruit ranking system, I like recruit Beth or fresh Beth, whatever you want to call it. I basically have like the cutoff for like when I stop caring after like 195. So like if you come in at 195, then I assume you can get to 210, like that kind of thing. And so like even if he is 195, I'm still not worried about that. And I get, you're not saying that you're necessarily worried about it either. You're saying maybe it's not going to be a great year one. And for running backs, I don't even know that we truly care if it's a great year one. Obviously, we want every single player to go in and completely dominate from day one and do that. But unfortunately, especially in this day and age, it's not really all that realistic. But I still have my hopes for Tatum. I think he's the most talented running back in this freshman class. But like you said, if he's more focused on baseball, if he's losing some weight, he's not necessarily in football shape, things like that. Maybe it will be a slow start for him. So I get it, especially the way that you described it. It makes sense. I don't like it. he's my favorite guy. I just drafted him.
Thank you, Devy Deets, Austin Nace, from Campus to Canton, for giving us a tough question, not just a softball. So appreciate that.
No, it was. It was a good question. I don't mind it. I mean, I think it's important to question yourself like that. Like I love Taylor Tatum. I just drafted him in this C2C draft. So it's
me too,
but,
in a supplemental as well.
Yeah, but then you make those points, and I can't really argue with that. Like there's nothing like unrealistic or anything like that you said. So it's important to do that kind of stuff, especially with Campus to Canton teams or campus teams. Like you might think, oh, I'm relying on Taylor Tatum. You might not be relying on him this year. You might be relying on him in the future. You might rely on him for Devy purposes or whatever, but yeah, it might not be year one. And Brad's in the chat again. He says, "Good morning, gents, from down under." So good morning to you. Omega King is not down under. He also said good morning. So we appreciate you, Omega. But we actually had another C2C boy in our favorite person in the entire world, Felix Sharp. said a lot of Devy slash C2C and I'm sorry, I'm gonna start that over. A lot of Devy slash C2C analysis is player focused. What are some specific strategy tips you guys would recommend? Now, when I first got this question, or when I first saw this question, I actually was kind of like taken aback because I think that more Devy slash C2C analysis comes from like teams and schemes and coaches than player driven analysis. That's one thing that Aaron and I have kind of always focused on is player driven analysis, and not to say that no one else does it or that like we're the only pod that talks about players or anything, but I don't know that I would agree with a lot of Devy analysis is player focused. I think that it should be, but maybe I need to like broaden my horizons. Maybe I need to listen to more Devy pods. I don't know. I listened to quite a few already, but if you guys have any that you would like me to listen to that are player focused, I would love to hear them. So put them in the chat, DM me, whatever. Let me know where these are. But I'm just letting you know a lot of them don't seem to be player focused that I'm listening to at the very least. I don't know if you feel the same or differently, Aaron.
Somewhat. I would say that ours is just typically so player focused that it makes other ones seem less so. But I don't think that there's necessarily a lack of podcasts covering players either. But I think in comparison, yes, it's a little bit different. But I will say, to go back to Felix's question here, what are some specific strategy tips that we would recommend for Devy or C2C leagues? I think a big piece of that is just when to take players. So let's say, you've already done your player analysis. You have an understanding of, with your queue, these are good players to take. Well, then we really want some game theory in there. I see Felix in the chat there. He's looking for game theory. We have to identify when to take players. Okay. So which player is most likely to be available in 2 rounds from now? Or which one is most likely to get taken away? If I don't grab him right here in your draft, who is the guy that I need to buy immediately? He's going to go up in value very soon with some of the hype that's starting this offseason, or you found some good analytical prediction metrics that really predict that he's going to be good. So I think at the end of the day, you have to know when to take these players and be very strategic with that. It's less about like maybe all the guys in your queue are good, but you might be able to nab most of them or a number of them if you play it out right. And it's sometimes difficult to know exactly when because drafts can be unpredictable, but know your competition, know your league mates. John just got done saying at the very beginning, he is getting sniped by Andy and myself. It's like, well, people who know John well and just know our podcast and some of our players that we like, some of our strategies that we take are going to realize that, some of the same players that we would normally target, we have to target even earlier because John's in the draft or because I'm in the draft, whatever the case is. So you have to know your competition a bit. If you're playing in a league with some guys who are much more like CFF focused, so they want these college producers, know that they might go much earlier. So if you want a potential stud who's going to be like a CFF only type of asset, ultimately, he's not maybe going to be an NFL prospect, then just know your league mates essentially if you can. So I think that those are a couple of things that are important when you're navigating a draft specifically.
I think if he's looking for like a name brand, kind of thing, like he said, 0 RB, late round QB, something you can put a name to. I'm gonna call my brand Devy Strong. There's probably a better name to it, but I think that a lot of people are becoming more and more focused on what CFF values can I get, what CFF players can I go get that are going to score me 30, 40 points a week. And that's great. I'm not saying that they're wrong, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying the way that I am transitioning or pivoting when they're doing that is I'm just sticking to Devy. And I did it. Felix and I are in a draft or in a league together, and it's a bunch of the guys from C2C. Devy Heavy was right there. Oh my god, I'm an idiot. Yep, that's way better. That's so much better than Devy Strong. Okay, we're going Devy Heavy, baby. But I think that Felix and I are in this league together, and he and a lot of the other C2C boys all were just going so CFF strong, like right away, right off the bat.
CFF heavy. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Devy, yeah. No.
Yes. Yeah, we got it. CFF heavy, Devy heavy. We got it all now. Okay. So, but they're doing all that, and I'm just looking at the board, and I'm like, okay, that guy from North Texas already went, but here's Alec Manor, or whoever it may be, like that, like people like that, players like that. I'm just gonna take that guy, and yeah, they might have an upper hand on me on the campus side, but it's going to give me such an advantage on the NFL side that I almost don't even care, and I still think that I can compete and do all that kind of stuff on the campus side with those quality Devy players. I might have a slight disadvantage or whatever because they went so CFF heavy, but it's not just them. I'm noticing it in the draft that we're doing right now. And even though I am getting sniped, I'm still able to take some of these players that I really like a London Humphreys and players like that are going later because the guys from North Texas and the guys from, Toledo and wherever else are going fairly early. Because like I said, we're only 15 rounds in. So, we still have 30 rounds to go. And you got all these CFF heavy players going. And I'm staying Devy heavy, baby.
Hey, I like it. And I would say that another, maybe not quite as catchy of a name, but just like a layered approach is one thing to consider in these leagues. Do you really want to draft all these guys who are all seniors? No. Or do you want to draft only freshmen who are clogging up your roster for years and probably not super productive right off the bat? A lot of busts if you're just drafting only freshmen. A layered approach, I think, makes the most sense in these leagues. And I think most folks do that already, but just being conscious of that when you're in drafts or when you're making trades of like, okay, how, senior heavy is my roster, for example, with these extra years of eligibility nowadays. I mean, that makes things a little bit more muddy. You can have more upperclassmen and they may be able to stick around for multiple years, but I just think that that's an underrated part about, roster construction and just how you're going to build your teams out.
Yeah, and actually, I was really focused on, or I was not very focused on that in the beginning of this draft that we're in right now. And then, not that I'm overly concerned about it, but I have quite a few sophomores, and so I'm like, that's not the worst thing. That's not like the worst place to be in, but there's probably, I could probably mix it up a little bit. So I'm starting to mix it up. I think I just drafted a senior, and like I'm starting to mix it up a little bit. But I had quite a few sophomores, but I would say it's probably better to have quite a few sophomores than like all fifth year players or something like that.
Yeah, no, most definitely.
Yeah, it was just the way that it was working out. It wasn't even like I was intentionally doing that. It was just, like I said, I'm getting sniped quite a bit. So it's like, all right, I'll take this guy now. And it just happens to be a lot of them were sophomores. Speaking of a sophomore, speaking of a guy I just drafted, our boy Omega King 1414. I don't think I've ever actually said the numbers on his name before. I've always just called him Omega King, but he is Omega King 1414 on Twitter, and he said, "Who is the next big Devy tight end?" And like I said, I just drafted him, so I think we got to go with Wilcox, right?
I think that's a great option. That's not the guy I picked, but I also knew or at least suspected who you're going to pick. So I wanted to give Omega another option.
So Wilcox, sophomore out of Arkansas. Unfortunately, he got hurt fairly early last year, but he came on strong for a handful of games before that. And I mean, as a true freshman, looking that good. Omega's like, oh no, we're gonna get two tight ends here. Yep, we're gonna give you two names, baby. Coming to the Devy Devotional here. We're not messing around. We're going Devy heavy. We're going tight end heavy as well. But what'd you say? You were muted.
No, nothing. I love that though. Yeah, this is a tight end show. If you didn't know, all. Yep.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Wilcox, Arkansas, true sophomore. Coming off the injury, as far as I know, everything has said that he was going to be ready for the start of the season and everything. I guess we'll find out here pretty soon if that's true, when they get back for practices and all that kind of stuff. But nothing really is screaming that he's not going to be ready for week 1 or anything like that. If he can build on what he did in year 1, then I think that he is literally the next big thing. And there's some, quality tight ends out there. Did you draft the player you're going to talk about? Because No, okay. So I mean, I don't want to ruin your choice or anything like that, but there's some quality tight ends out there. I don't know that I truly believe they're going to be that next Sam Laporta, that next Trey McBride or anything like that. They're good. They're the number one tight end right now in college. I just don't know if I feel the same way. I feel like Lukash could be that if he can take that step forward this year.
Yeah, and like I said, I do like that selection. That was a guy that I considered, but I kind of knew that you were leaning that way. I am going to pick a guy who was more efficient than Sam Laporta when they were playing on the same team together, and that's Luke Lachey, tight end for Iowa. And we know what Iowa puts out there. I don't need to go through the list of all these successful Iowa tight ends, how they develop the position, how these guys end up bulking up and developing out that frame. But Luke Lachey, he just has kind of everything that you want from the, efficiency. He has the size, he has enough speed, strength to him. It's just that he didn't stay healthy last year. He played 3 games. He was good, but I mean, it was only 3 games or 2.5, or I don't know how much that was technically. But yes, we have not got the full breakout from him. But in 2022, when sharing the field with Sam Laporta, he was very successful, almost 400 receiving yards. And Sam Laporta had 1 receiving touchdown. Luke Lachey had 4 that season. and Laporta played 12 games and Lachey played 13. So, and like I said, he was more explosive than Laporta as well. This is not me saying he's a better player. This is me just saying that's sticking out. Like that has to. And the team that he's coming from, it's going to be kind of a down class. I could easily see Luke Lachey end up being the tight end 1 in the class. Lukash would not be able to be, the tight end 1 in that class because, of course, he has to wait another year. So that's just my pick here with Luke. But at the end of the day, I liked your selection as well. I think both of those guys are going to be nice options over the next 2 years, Omega. And I will say a deeper option, one that you may have been alluding to, John, was somebody I just selected. I considered him. I just selected him in our Campus Academy draft. I think in the startup, it was the 14th, 13th round. And that's Harold Fannin Jr., Bowling Green tight end. And I know it's Bowling Green, right? So folks will be skeptical of that, but he can be deployed all over the field. And he's was the best blocker, or I guess the best blocking tight end that was rated this last season, just in college in general. That's notable for a guy who is a skilled receiver. So not only is he competent as a blocker, but in the receiving game, he's versatile. He played in the backfield. They're trying to get him touches. That's all very interesting to me. So I think that ultimately Fannin has enough juice to end up testing pretty well and being maybe a top tight end in this class this next year if he ends up declaring and he stays healthy and everything this season.
Yeah, the small school part isn't great, but man, there's so many guys, Lachey included, that have never surpassed 400 receiving yards or anything. And at least we can say, even though it's a lower level of competition, we can at least say that Fannin has done that. I think he's been closer to 700 yards in a season. So if he can keep doing that, then he could easily be that next Trey McBride kind of guy that comes out of the lower level and just obviously he hasn't dominated the way that McBride has or did, but can be that next lower level guy that kind of hits the scene or whatever. But I think that is probably enough tight end talk because we are not actually a tight end pod. But that was the most we've talked about tight end in quite some time. So you want to hit us up with the next question there, Aaron?
Yeah. So it's from Hoove at HooveTube. And the question is, what's the most underrated school to scout wide receivers and why is it SMU? Okay, John, thoughts on SMU?
All right, so yeah, I don't know about that. What do you have? Cortland Sutton. Who else is coming out of SMU?
Rashee Rice, probably.
Definitely not Rashee Rice.
I
not
actually liked
guy, so.
I liked Rice actually after I think it was his sophomore season. I was like, there's something there because just nobody had him ranked. I think Brandon Lejeune was one of the few guys who also was very interested in him after early in his collegiate career. But at the end of the day, I mean, Rice is not some sort of elite NFL wide receiver either. So SMU, they put out some fun players, but I think the most underrated wide receiver school that nobody ever talks about It's got to be Ohio State. No, but
Who's that again?
Ohio State, they've put out a couple of guys kind of interesting lately. So, yeah.
Omega agrees with me that Rashee Rice is not good. Unfortunately, I think that Rashee Rice is one of those kind of like a Chase Claypool-esque player. I'm not comping the players or anything like, or even their styles or anything, but just one of those players that like was needed in year one and then just doesn't really ever do much again. And I kind of feel like that's how it's going to be in the NFL. Obviously, he had his big year in his, I think it was his 5th year in college or senior year, whatever it was. But I've just never been the biggest fan. And Felix Sharp says Preston Stone, the next Jake Hayner. Wow. I know my co-host on the Devy U podcast is a pretty big Preston Stone fan, so I don't know if he's gonna love hearing that. And Omega said Juju. He said that's too far. I said Claypool. He said Juju. I mean, they're kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, I guess speaking of Juju, I mean USC, I guess you could say is somewhat of an underrated one. Like we think of Alabama, we think of Ohio State, we think of LSU, but USC has actually put up quite a few good tight or good wide receiver talents. It's just they haven't put out maybe the elite guys. Like there's the Drake Londons, Michael Pittman Juniors, the Jujus, the Jordan Addisons, go down the list. There's some guys that potentially coming up in the next few years are going to be pretty solid out of USC, you would think, but maybe not quite the same juice. But I'd say they could be still considered underrated, though they're still a top program.
No, I think that's really good. I was actually just bringing up my my recruit work research that I've been doing, and I was looking to see who are the top schools. And unfortunately, for wide receivers, it's the obvious ones. It's your Bamas, your Clemsons, your LSU's. Oklahoma has a couple, and these are the players that have hit as a top 24 season in the NFL in the past like 6 or 7 years. So I'm not saying this is the only ones or whatever, but just from that time period and everything. Obviously, Ohio State. We have Penn State with a couple hits there, and then Ole Miss, we have a couple as well. So I guess we could say an underrated school would be Ole Miss. I mean, we have AJ Brown, we have DK Metcalf. I know Elijah Moore hasn't quite done what we wanted him to do in the NFL, but I mean, he was a highly sought after recruit or a prospect, I should say, once he was drafted.
Trey Harris, stud. Jonathan Mingo, of course. Stud. Jonathan Mingo, just world beater.
Hey, he got 2nd round draft capital, right?
People were taking him in
that would be an underrated one for sure.
Yeah, right. That's fair. I was looking back now at USC just to kind of double check myself, and they even had like some other solid guys, not great NFL players, but like Marquise Lee and like Robert Woods, and yeah, there's some Nelson Aguilar, like solid guys. Obviously not stars, but yeah, for sure.
I'll give it to you. I think USC is a good call because it's not something that a lot of people are just going to say like right off the top of their head. Oh yeah, USC wide receiver U or anything like that. So I think that is a good answer to the question. I think we can all agree it's not SMU, unfortunately. Oh, sorry. I have people texting me and it's popping up on my computer for some reason. So we'll all right, let's get on to the next question, and it is from our friend Drew Christens 18 on Twitter, and it's how do you differentiate who and when to draft different types of players in C2C leagues? For example, freshmen versus unproven young guys, upperclassmen who haven't truly broken out yet, CFF producers, yada, yada, yada. This is kind of what we were talking about earlier with Felix, but maybe a little different. It's more, I guess, when do you feel comfortable? I mean, at least the way I'm reading it, like when do you truly feel comfortable kind of switching from your really high-end recruits to your more proven second-year players, third-year players, whatever, then getting into CFF-only players and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, and maybe I'll bring back that phrase that I used earlier, but that layered approach I think does make sense if you're trying to build a well-rounded team. Not everybody does, but I find that the teams who only go CFF players, they can struggle because if they don't win the championship, well, they're also not putting many Devy guys to their rosters on the NFL side either. So kind of a struggle. And they have to rebuild year to year because we know that CFF guys can be volatile with the transfer portal, or if they just end up not being very good in general, because they're probably not good prospects. So you kind of run into trouble if you go too heavy on one side. So that's why that layered approach works. However, who to differentiate or how you can differentiate when you're drafting, I just you can look at ADP. It only does so much good at the end of the day, but it's important to be aware of when these guys go. So, for example, in supplemental and startup drafts this time of year, you know that freshmen are going off the board maybe earlier than they should. And we know how volatile freshmen can be. However, if there are a few freshmen that you really want, you might have to just reach and draft them, knowing that you can get some other guys later because freshmen just get propped up. So avoid all the freshmen you don't like. Get the couple of freshmen that you do like if they fall at a decent enough value. I don't like the idea of getting CFF producers early on in general, and we've talked about this in previous pods, but how do you differentiate? Well, you don't really pick those CFF only options early. I'm just giving the edge if you're between like a talented freshman or maybe an unproven young guy who's done a little bit thus far. Like go that option instead of the CFF producer in the majority of cases. So it's a blanket statement. It's not 100% of the cases, but at the end of the day, I mean, we already talked about you want the Devy heavy approach for the most part, and yeah, I mean that's how I'm treating it. It's a case by case basis for sure, but that's those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think the easy answer to the question is, you want to go with that like name brand approach. You really want to go with that Devy heavy kind of approach to your draft. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, like that's just like I said before, that's how I do it, and I try to stick to my guns as long as I possibly can. But eventually, there's that guy, that one CFF guy that's like standing out, and it's like, you know what? I can probably let this Devy player that like no one else is talking about, isn't on anyone's rankings and that kind of thing. I could probably let him, wait a couple rounds, and I can go ahead and take the CFF guy. So I think for me, the easiest way to answer this question and all of the research that I've been doing is for that purpose. Is trying to figure out what are the hit rates for each individual thing, and so now that I'm actually getting hit rates on freshman recruits and things like that, I can sit here and go, okay, well, this guy has a 25% chance of hitting. This guy has a 40% chance of hitting. This guy has a 30%. And then the CFF guy has a 3% chance of hitting, but is going to score me a bunch of points. And, I can sit there and make that determination. Once I get down, it doesn't take very long. I've been doing this research for a while now. It doesn't take long to get down to like 14% for the hit rates, and that's like in the top 20 freshman recruits in this class. Now, a lot of people said it's a down class, so maybe that's not normal, but in this class, we're down to like 14% hit rates in the top 20, after the top 20 of the freshman recruits. So at that point, I'm looking at these guys, Eric Singleton Jr., like players like that have already hit, Abu Sama the third, players like that are probably sitting closer to a 30 or 40% chance of hitting in the NFL at this point. I'm taking those guys over these 14% guys. And so it's easier for me, just the way my brain works, to just say, all right, this is more than this, this is less than that. And so it's just easy. Whether it's technically right or wrong, whatever. Obviously, every player has their own odds, and I can't say just because they're 14% that they're going to hit at a 14% rate or blah blah blah. But it's just an easy way for me to look at it, and I'm just kind of making my bets based on that.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I guess at the end of the day, if you are looking at it from I can't really differentiate. I have a queue of 80 different guys. Well, start looking at your roster. And I'm not saying you need to draft for need, because we do want to still draft overall for the best player available. But at the end of the day, like if you're really, really deficient on college scoring and you want to try to compete there, like you do have to start looking at that type of a player, that type of an asset. Or if you really don't have any young guys on your roster, they're all fourth, fifth year guys. You might want to go a little bit young, just mix in a little bit of young talent onto that team if the right guys are out there.
Absolutely. We got the boss man in the chat telling us that we're looking good. We appreciate it. Especially the little logo with the mailman. Yeah, we appreciate that little added touch tonight. So thank you, Nate. That was great after a long day of answering Reddit questions, which I can only imagine how much fun that was. I've never truly been on Reddit, but I've heard some nice fun stories. So um, yes, the mailman, that is me, baby. We're answering questions, we're delivering the mail. Delivering the Devy Devotional. There we go. We got it. So let's get to the next question. We got at Sidewalk Buffalo says Ollie Gordon. All right, that's not really a question, but that was the first thing that he put. Ollie Gordon. And he says, for those of us drafting the next couple of weeks, we won't know what the DUI fallout will be. By the way, Ollie Gordon had a DUI. He was arrested for DUI. So that's going to be an issue. And he's asking what the fallout will be. Any reason not to draft in the first round of supplementals, I'm assuming he's asking. And then what's the recent suspension precedent? Now, I would assume that answering the precedent question is probably going to be different for each individual school. And possibly even each conference might have their own way of doing things. Each school is going to have their own way of doing things. Each coach is going to have their own way. So I don't know that we can truly say, oh, well, this is going to happen because of this or whatever. We can say that Trevor Etienne just had a very similar thing happen a couple months ago. He might have a different suspension or a different punishment than Ollie Gordon. But unfortunately, I don't think it's fortunately and unfortunately, I don't think that the DUI fallout is going to be all that bad. I just really don't think it's going to be. Assuming that nothing happened, which I didn't hear any bad details about somebody getting hurt or anything like that. Assuming those kind of things, unfortunately, a lot of times this kind of stuff gets swept under the rug, gets pushed back and they get a half game suspension and you never really hear about it again. I'm not saying that that's exactly how it's going to play out. I don't truly know. Aaron might have a little more insight onto that of with OK State and the way that they do things, but I can just say I don't think that there's any reason not to draft Ollie Gordon because of this DUI.
Yeah, no, all that is fair. I don't really have anything insight, within the program or anything like that. So, as far as the question goes to any reason not to draft in the first round, I mean, I think it's fair game. Like some folks are drafting him in the first round of startups, first rounds of definitely CFF drafts, those types of leagues as well. So not just supplementals.
He went in the first round of our startup, the one that we're doing right now.
Exactly. So, at the end of the day, that's a lofty price to pay, but if you're going to hold off on him, make it be more about what he is as a player and a prospect versus this bit of news. So I don't think he's going to miss more than maybe a game or two is possible. But like John said, it could be a quarter, it could be a half of a game for sure. We just don't know. So at the end of the day, likely won't really deter me from drafting him unless I was already kind of out on him in the first place at that price tag.
Yeah, and of course the price is all there really is, but I feel like, especially with the DUI, it might even make it more, but I feel like there's enough people that don't truly believe in Ollie Gordon because OK State doesn't have enough of a great track record of putting out these running backs. Although, I mean, they're putting them into the NFL. They're even starting in the NFL. You can say what you want, but Jaylen Warren is technically starting in the NFL. Chuba Hubbard starting in the NFL last year. So, I mean, it's not like they're not producing at all or anything like that. It's just not necessarily Saquon Barkley or something to that effect. Now, I truly believe that Ollie Gordon's another level from a Chuba Hubbard or from a Jaylen Warren. Warren might have similar bursts and things like that, but he's just never been a workhorse back where we've seen Ollie Gordon touch the ball 30-something times in a game. Like we know that he can touch the ball. He can be a workhorse, and that's just something we've never really seen from Jaylen Warren. Even though, I guess he kind of did in college, but not to the levels that Ollie Gordon's doing it. So I just think he's a step above. But there's enough question marks to where I really don't hate his price. I mean, especially in supplementals, if he's still there, that's one of those things where it's I would rather take the proven guy in Ollie Gordon than one of these players that has a 20% hit rate, that kind of thing. That's one of those high-end players where I'm willing to just, avoid the freshman altogether in the first round and take an Ollie Gordon over him. But I think that is enough about that. Oh, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of like when you're drafting a Derrick Henry or something like that later in his career, and that, I mean, he's at least going to give you really, really solid production. You don't know for how long. You don't really know what the future is going to hold, if he's going to be a legit NFL guy or just kind of a, on a roster, but maybe not like the workhorse type of guy at the NFL level. But still, that production that he's going to give you now is so valuable. So certainly could see that spending up for Ollie Gordon instead of taking a dice roll on some random freshman, for example. Yeah, all fair there.
And Nate says that Reddit was great. It's the website design that's going to kill him. And I guess we should probably talk about it. The website just started up yesterday. It's not a done deal. It's not 100% done, but there are some evergreen articles and things like that, strategy pieces, dynasty. Probably have some Devy stuff out there here in a little bit. And eventually we're going to work to where we have all the tools and everything at optimusfantasy.com. So obviously make sure you're checking out that. And we hope to have, don't get discouraged if every link doesn't work or whatever. It's a work in progress, but we're hoping to have it completed or somewhat, basically completed by like August 1st. And but for now, like I said, we still have some more like evergreen pieces, things like that. Scott Fishbowl, I saw like a Scott Fishbowl article up there, with some strategy involved. So there's some stuff that you should definitely go check out at optimusfantasy.com. All right, that brings us to our last question, and this one's a doozy. Andrew Woodruff at _Devy Scout on Twitter asked us for C2C, give us 3 freshmen your model likes above consensus ranks by a nice margin, and same for 3 experienced college vets, year 2 or above. And my answer to Andrew, the short answer is I don't have a model. I have Beth. And so, I don't know how to go. No, I'm just saying. Yeah, I can definitely do this. Unfortunately, Aaron does not have a model, but he does have a process. And so I think he can go ahead and answer this question for us too. But this is not an easy question.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's an involved question for sure. I took a little bit of time just to, even though this was a question that I just saw right before the show, I took a little time to sift through the ranks and really see like who do I like more than consensus, essentially, and who do I think is going to be kind of a savvy pick, whether that's at a value or whatever, but that consensus is not high enough on yet. So, and we already talked about Taylor Tatum. I'm going to assume that you'll bring him up, John. I'm going to bypass that. I hate to give away too many spoilers here, but I'm just guessing. I don't know for sure, but I'll throw out a couple other running backs and a wide receiver as far as some freshmen that I like. My process likes. One is Bryant Wesco, still a pretty high end recruit there. It's just that TJ Moore going to Clemson has overshadowed him slightly, but Bryant Wesco was very impressive in the spring. The whole coaching staff was buzzing about him. He's a versatile guy who can play inside and outside with good size, very good route running, ball skills, and agility. So he is a guy that I'm excited about at the wide receiver position. I think if he's certainly in a good position to beat that year 1-0, to be involved, even though it is kind of a crowded wide receiver room, we'll say there at Clemson. There's room for a bigger guy, or at least a guy with his solid size to step up there. Him, TJ Moore, and then one of those slot guys, Tyler Brown, Antonio Williams. I could see all 3 of those guys, or maybe even 4 of those guys getting involved for sure. So that would be one guy. Do you want me to go through them, or do you want to add one guy of your own, John?
Let's go back and forth. So I'm not going to cheat. I think Taylor Tatum's cheating because even though I do feel like both of us are higher than consensus on him, I think most people still have him like top 3 or something like that for the most part. So even then, it's not really that much higher. I mean, it's more nitpicking of like, oh, I would take him here and I would take him there. But like, I don't think anyone truly believes that Taylor Tatum's a bad running back or anything like that. So I'm just going to go ahead, even though I do, like I said, I do think we both like him above, and definitely Debbie Beth loves Taylor Tatum, the number 1 running back in the model, but it's not by that much. So like it's not like miles above Quentin Martin, who I have as my RB2 in the class. So it's not that crazy or anything like that. I do think that Debbie Beth or Fresh Beth, I should say, is much higher on Kedron Young than most people are. And I know there's definitely some people that like Kedron. I think that people are coming around to it. You're seeing people fall out of love with Jeremiah Love. and more in love with with Keidron Young and Jadarian Price and players like that. So I think that it's getting more prevalent, but I don't think that people have caught up yet. And so I think that it's still or Fresh Beth is much higher on Keidron Young there. But I mean, it's just, and maybe it's my own biases or whatever you want to call it, but I see Audric Estime in Keidron Young. I see it. You know, they're similar sizes. You know, I say if anything, Keidron Young's actually a little more athletic. So it's almost like you have a more athletic. And I mean, I've gone back and I've done the research. Keidron Young hits better in Fresh Beth than Audric Estime did. So, you know, like I'm saying, he could be or should, maybe even should be better than Audric Estime. I think that people kind of get like a, you know, a bad taste in their mouth with Estime being drafted in the 4th round, and you know, it didn't quite work out. He didn't run the 40 time people want him to run, but I mean, the dude was a stud in college, like an absolute stud. If he goes out and runs like a 4.55 or something like that at the combine, he's probably drafted in the 3rd round, and we're talking about him a little differently. Unfortunately, he didn't do that. I think it worked out great to where I was able to get him a lot cheaper in in my rookie drafts. But you know, like I obviously I get that, like I said, the bad taste in the mouth. But I think that Keidron Young is one of those players that I'm going to be higher on than most.
Nice, nice. Another one that I'm going to be higher on than most, another running back here, that's Jordan Lyle, Miami running back. I know he's buried in some folks' rankings, you know, not in the top 10. He is in the top 10 for me. He was at one point here RB1 for On3. You know, there's some disputes between the recruiting services, but some other folks like at Rivals, they had him RB5 as well, and all the big time schools wanted Jordan Lyle. So I think that ultimately, like very, very good high school production, over 10 yards per carry, a great mark that you want to see his senior year, very productive and capable also as a receiver. So that's a good thing that you can check off. I think there's enough burst there. I would estimate 4.4 to 4.5 range there. And I just thought he was elusive. His contact balance was good. He just, you know, he landed in a good situation, which got a little bit more muddy now with Damian Martinez coming in. But I'm not going to overweight that because I think Martinez is a one and done type of guy at Miami. I would think that that's the case unless there's some other strange circumstances that happen. So at the end of the day, Jordan Lyle will get his opportunity sooner or later, in my opinion. He is a very talented running back that we need to pay more attention to at Miami, and he is going a little bit under the radar compared to consensus.
I was trying to see if I could find an updated weight on him. I know we've kind of gone back and forth on the weights with them. He was originally listed at 180 on 247, and you had said something like up to over 200 possibly, and or you know, at least right around 200. I don't know if you actually have like an updated. I was trying to like find the Miami website real quick, and I wasn't. I was scrolling through, and I'm getting a lot of 247 articles and stuff like that. So
Right, right. Yeah, I am very curious to see how that comes in. And that's a case of me, like if, for example, if I had a model, if I had Beth, right? Beth has to be kind of truthful to like what is listed on 247, for example, not really going off of like what the beat writer is tweeting out there, you know, this or that. And maybe in some cases you do pull that data when it's more of a verified source, but I have seen some reports out there that he is more like that 200 pounds, which I definitely believe. So yeah, very interesting. He was just talked about on a podcast recently too. They were covering the freshman backs, and he was ranked highly. So I mean, there are some folks out there who have him top 10 as well, but it is certainly not consensus.
yeah, and I told you back then, and I'm telling you now, like I just want to see it. You know, if I can see a confirmed report that he's 200 or you know something from the school or whatever, then I'll go ahead and change him, and he's going to skyrocket because I still have him listed as 180, and I've gone through and I've changed a couple of the weights that I've actually seen from the school or you know verified source or whatever. Some of these guys, like I think I just changed Jordan Marshall. You know, he was like, I think he was listed like 190 originally or something like that, and he's now 200. on Michigan's website, and so I went ahead and changed it, and it bumped him up a little bit. So it's nothing too crazy, but just little minor changes. But when you're talking about a couple spots, sometimes those little minor changes might be a huge difference. It might be the difference in you getting that player in a draft or not. And so I'm trying to stay up to date with it. I will say it's difficult. Some of these guys aren't even in school yet. They early enrollees, late enrollee. It's a mess, man.
Right.
I
Jordan Lyle
I
is a
love
late enrollee for sure. So
yeah, I love C2C. I love Devy. I love all that. But man, it's just so much easier with Dynasty and with the NFL. You got your stats. They're right there. You get them and nothing. You don't have to do any work. You don't have to do anything. It's just done. It's so much different with Devy and C2C, man. I'm hitting up 8 different websites just to figure out if a guy's actually like okay, if he's playing, if he's practicing, if he's doing any of that. Like I'm spending more time on that crap than than actually working on Devy Beth and all that. I'm just trying to figure out if a guy's 192 or 194, and I'm like, I spend 3 days trying to figure that shit out.
that's funny.
All right, so we talked about a couple running backs. Why don't we go to a different position here? Well, I'm going to talk about Mikey Matthews at Tennessee. I think he's stood out from the first time I started focusing on recruits. I think he was actually a little higher even. And then once I did a little more research and I kind of like honed in the way that Fresh Beth works, he dropped a little bit, but I still feel like I have Mike Matthews a lot higher than a lot of people. And I think a lot of Devy analysts, C2C analysts and everything, they have concerns about his position, what he's going to play. Is he going to be a slot receiver? Is he going to be on the outside? Things like that. And that's not what I focus on. So, that's why I'm going to, that's why Fresh Beth is going to be higher on him than other people that are maybe putting a little more context to it. But I'll tell you what, I'm not saying that I'm right and I'm not saying they're wrong, but there are plenty of times where that context doesn't work out, and you think it, and then next thing you know, the coach does something different than you thought they were going to do, or they decide, hey, this player can play on the outside, they can play in the slot, they can do whatever. And so I want to say he is a quality recruit who can be something great in college and in the NFL in the future. So I'm going to bank on that. Whether he's the perfect fit, whether he's buried behind Squirrel White and things like that, I'm not going to worry about that stuff. I'm going to say that I think if I was his coach, I would do whatever I could to get him on the field and use him properly. And so that's what I'm going to do. But, it's just you have an athletic, bigger player that is that is going to a quality school with a quality quarterback, quality system that's going to get the ball. They're going to throw for 4,000 yards or more. Like, I want that kind of player, and that's why I am higher, or I should say, Fresh Beth is higher on Mike Matthews.
Nice. Well, we've given a couple of guys at least freshman wise if we combine our processes. So do you want to get into some more experienced college vets, or did you want to
Sure.
Go additionally on freshmen?
I think, for freshmen, that's probably pretty good. Honestly, there's not too many other ones that. Well, honestly, we talked about Jordan Marshall. I think I might be a little higher on, even though I say that, but he actually just got drafted. I just got sniped on him in like the last round in our campus draft here. So I guess maybe I'm not higher than consensus, but that one was really more of me thinking I could wait more than it's not that I didn't want to draft him. It's that I just thought that I could wait, and obviously that did not work out. And our good friend Drew, I think, was the one that drafted Jordan Marshall like a round or two ago, and so yeah, that one hurt. That did not feel great. And he also, I'm not saying he only did it because of my ranks or anything like that, but he does have access to my ranks, so he probably saw that I was going to take him in the near future, and he decided to go ahead and draft him there. So I will say that Jordan Marshall's probably another one that I'm a little higher on, although once again, I'm getting sniped left and right in this draft.
I think I'm there with you.
Why don't you start us out with a vet that you're a little higher on?
Yeah, sure thing. This is a guy that I drafted in our C2C league here. So a guy who's already off the board, safe to talk about, we'll say. But this is Jam Miller, running back at Alabama. Just think that from what he has done thus far in the spring game, he's just stepping into a situation where that lead back position is open, and we all think that it's going to go elsewhere. The job is not necessarily going to go to him as there's Justice Haynes there at Alabama. But at the end of the day, like what Justice Haynes did as a freshman was very notable. But I mean, that's something that we've already seen Jam Miller do as a freshman as well. He did very similar things production wise. And just because Jam Miller didn't break out last year doesn't mean that he won't get that opportunity now, with some opportunity, I guess, available in that backfield to at least split carries, be a very, very functional back. So I think ultimately, from a pass catching standpoint, from a speed, size, I mean, recruit status, everything that you want, Jam Miller brings that. There's just not the clarity there. So I will take the discount. He is not ranked that highly in consensus, though I think you and I have both had some discussions here of like, well, why are we ranking a guy who hasn't done it yet this highly? Well, I view it as like a Josh Jacobs type of thing, a guy who is very talented, but it's going to take a while for him to get on the field with that type of a team, with that type of a situation. And you just got to wait your turn at Alabama. I think Jam Miller's turn is now. He is one, though, that I don't even know if I'm that much higher than consensus. I didn't check the ADP prior to this, so maybe it's cheating a little bit, but I'm just very excited for him this
I think you're a
season.
round or two, or at least you drafted him, whether you felt like you had to or whatever, but I feel like you drafted him like a round or two earlier than consensus would probably say that you have to.
Yeah, no, that's fair for sure. I mean, I'll tell you maybe another guy I was considering here, but I am curious to see one upperclassman that you are higher on than consensus.
Well, I guess it might be cheating now because I feel like everyone's kind of coming around to it. But if you remember, about a month or two ago, I put out a bunch of graphics and it was like my top 5 Devy QBs, my top 5 Devy wide receivers, and so on and so forth. And I put Alec Minor, I can never say his freaking name, as my wide receiver 5 in the class and in the 2025 draft class, and I got a lot of slack about it. like people were giving me a lot of crap about it, and I just, now it seems like a lot of people are coming around. All of a sudden, you're hearing his name more. I'm not saying that I'm the only reason why that's happening. I think people are just kind of coming around to, like, you have your film grinders that are finally coming around to actually watching him. Watching his film and stuff like that. Maybe, seeing his name a couple times on Twitter, people start looking him up, looking at the stats, looking whatever. Next thing you know, you have a lot of people that are they're kind of falling in love with them. And so I don't, well, it might be cheating because, like I said, he's kind of creeping up. But especially a month or two ago, it was like I was one of the few people that was saying he's in my top 5. That might be more normal now, but I still feel like I'm at least a little ahead of consensus there.
Yeah, right. You were definitely ahead of consensus then, and now now that gap is probably closing. But yes, you are a big fan, and I'm certainly a fan as well. I like that selection as somebody who has been kind of sticking out in your model. So, what other guy I guess I was considering talking about? This one would be more accurate as far as I'm actually higher on him than consensus by maybe a bigger margin, would be Jaden Blue, Texas running back as well. A guy I've kind of went back and forth with. Like last year I was dropping him, but then we really saw him break out and show that yes, that explosiveness, that exciting aspect that he was bringing from high school is actually starting to translate over to the NFL side. He's the fastest running back returning to college football this year, which I think is really exciting, considering that he is a guy who I think will be close to 200-ish pounds this season if he's not already there. I do think he can get there at least. He's been there in the past, even in high school. I just don't know exactly why he dropped that much weight coming into college, besides sitting out his senior season, just kind of resting during that COVID year. But anyways, Jaden Blue, he's just set up for great opportunity there, because we know Texas, they're going to be comfortable with splitting him and CJ Baxter. That's just what we've been hearing out of the spring. We know that CJ Baxter came in as a highly touted, borderline 5-star type of running back, but then he was not really that explosive or efficient this last year versus Blue was much more so breaking off big runs. I think they're going to be forced to give him carries. And I think that, Jaden Blue not dominating when he was a freshman with all that talent there, that shouldn't be that surprising. And we know that Jonathan Brooks is a good player too. So ultimately, being stuck behind the guys there at Texas these last few years, I'm not, holding it too much against him. So I'm excited to see what is coming there. I think he's a very capable receiving back and a rushing back. Give me all the Jaden Blue shares.
Yeah, I'm torn. You're definitely higher on Blue than I am. I see the athleticism clearly. I mean, he was the fastest running back in all of college and all that. I still don't know if I feel like he's ever going to be like a workhorse back or anything like that. And I don't even know if you're saying that that's what he's going to be. But Baxter did underwhelm. Blue overwhelmed, but it was I really want to hope that Baxter was just dealing with injuries, because he was. I mean, he was dealing with injuries, and I'm hoping that but for his sake, that it just kind of hampered him. And when it's all said and done, he's going to go right back, because I mean, he was an amazing recruit. And I'll tell you what, like there's not a lot of things that we can sit here and say like are guaranteed or anything like that in Devy and C2C. But the number one overall running back, a lot of times in the class, most of the time that player hits. It's not always, it's definitely not always, but just from the research that I've done, a lot of the times that player hits. And Baxter was the number one RB in the class. So I want to believe in Baxter. I have him in at least 2 leagues, maybe 3 leagues. So like I kind of have to believe in him at this point. But I'm actually willing to trade him if anyone's listening. But not a low ball. I'm just saying like I'm willing to trade him, which I wouldn't have been if he had gone out and and just dominated, of course. But I'm also willing to wait and hope that he is plays better. But back to Blue, I don't know that. I don't believe that he's just going to get this like workhorse role or anything like that, and that he's going to go out and all of a sudden become a 2nd or 3rd round pick in the NFL draft. Maybe that speed, maybe he goes out and runs a 4.33 or something like that, or 4.37 or whatever it is at the combine, and then he gets that Jalen Wright kind of draft capital, and maybe we will be excited about him. But I don't know. I guess that just not touching the field at all that first year just really made me think like what's going on here. But obviously we know there were some pretty good players ahead of him. So that's probably enough about Blue. I feel like I'm closer to consensus, but I was telling Drew, we were talking yesterday, I think it was, and I was saying I feel like with Blue, it's one of those players that he's either just going to fall off completely or he's going to be in like the top 12 immediately. Like the first couple weeks of the season, all of a sudden everyone's going to be like, all right, well, Jaden Blue's a stud, and that's going to be the way it's going to work. So I feel like we'll know pretty quickly, and it's not something we're going to be sitting here questioning when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and hopefully we will know quickly. But at the end of the day, even if it is a timeshare there, some sort of a split, that should keep him fresh, efficient, explosive. And at the end of the day, NFL, they like these explosive backs. We know that if they get into the right system, like you just mentioned, Jalen Wright going to Miami, be even more exciting if A-Chain wasn't there. But we know that Jaden Blue has a lot going for him. And don't forget, he was the RB1 in the class before he sat out his senior season. So, I mean, the guy was a high end recruit. It's just that he tumbled down a little bit because, of course, when you don't play the senior season, other guys really start making a name for themselves and you forget how good he is. So, certainly a guy, I'm not saying you take him super early in your drafts. You don't really have to. I think I took him in this startup in the 6th, and I was fine with him at that point for sure.
Absolutely. So another player, probably my last player. I think we're at hour 10 here. I think we've done a pretty good job answering all these questions, and we do really appreciate you guys sending them all in, even the difficult ones, Andrew. But I think I have found that I'm higher on Kyron Drones than most people, than consensus. Now that did not work out for me in the C2C League of Record because he was drafted, I want to say He was drafted in like the second round of the supplemental, and I was planning on taking him in the third round. And so I should have known better. Now, I will admit it's a 3 QB league and not like super flex or whatever. It's, you start 3 QBs. And so the QBs just went rampant. It's like they just went wild. So that was probably more on me. As much as I like him, I probably should just went ahead and taken him in the second. I'm trying to remember who I did take, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But regardless, I really think Kyron Drones could be a Devy viable player when it's all said and done. But on top of that, for C2C purposes, he's going to score like a bunch of points. He has the athleticism, he has the rushing ability, and he pushes the ball down the field. I mean, he's kind of that gunslinger with the rushing ability and athleticism that we love to see. And yet, he's being taken as like the 15th or sometimes even later on quarterback in these C2C drafts. And I just don't get it. I mean, like, what more do you want? There's not too much that we can say. I mean, he has 6.5 yards per carry, which is, like you're only getting a handful of Devy viable guys that are hitting those kind of thresholds. Obviously, there's a bunch of guys in college that are going to hit that, but if they're, they might be small, they might be playing in the MAC, they might be doing whatever. We have a guy that's actually, playing in what the ACC, has a great interception rate here, has his PPR points per touch are great. His big time throw rate is amazing, 8.4%. He is at 10.7 intended air yards per play, well above the 9.5 intended air yards that I'm looking for per play. Not much to dislike about Kyron Drones. I'm loving the player. I did take him in our startup that we're doing right now as my QB3, I believe. Maybe it was my QB2. But I have him. He's one of my 3 QBs. I know that much. So I think that I am above, or Debbie Beth is above consensus on Kyron Drones.
Yeah, he's certainly a riser now at this point, but you're still ahead. Guys who were taken ahead of him in this draft, I can't believe a couple of them. Kate Klubnik was taken ahead, Byron Brown, Caden Salter. I get those, I guess, from the CFF type of standpoint, but Drew Alar, Avery Johnson. There are a couple ones that were slightly surprising, to say the least. But yeah, Kyron, good call with another guy who the model is picking up on.
All right, you got anything else for us, or are you ready to call tonight?
Yeah, not really anything else. I mean, I already talked about Harold Fannin Jr., just a guy that seemed to be a little bit higher on. There are certainly guys who are also high on him, though. And I like Tez Johnson actually a fair amount too, wide receiver at Oregon. Just like what he's done thus far in his career, kind of succeeded everywhere he's been. And I think even though there's going to be some really good competition there in Evan Stewart, we saw that what Tez did last year with good competition there in Troy Franklin, who was established there for multiple seasons. So I think that there are some exciting times ahead. I know that you're excited for Dylan Gabriel and what he can do for this Oregon offense, and even Dante Moore if he was forced into action. So certainly some exciting production ahead and potential, maybe even day 2 draft capital for Tez Johnson there at Oregon.
I like it. All right. Well, once again, we do appreciate your questions. We're having a lot of fun over here at Optimus. Make sure that you're checking out the brand new website. Like I said, give us a little bit of leeway here. Give us a little bit of time, but keep checking it out. See what new is up every day, and make sure you subscribe to the mail letter. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to obviously get as many of those as we can get. Like, subscribe, comment, do all that kind of good stuff. We're a new channel. We're a new company. We need as much help as we can get. We're fighting against all of these big companies that have been around for a long time. And, we're trying to work with them, but we're also trying to take some of their fans away as well. So, Aaron, do you have any words of wisdom for us before we get out of here?
Yeah, well, hey, adding quality content to the to balance out some takes out there, and just to have another hopefully very reliable source and entertaining source to consume, I guess, as a content consumer is important. So hopefully we could provide that. As far as other wise words, no wise cracks or wise words from me.
Wow, that may be a first, but how are you feeling about your draft so far? Anything you would have changed? I know that's another question that was right off the top of the head, and it didn't give you any time, but
Yeah,
anything you can
no.
think of?
Um, from the NFL side, I did trade away some of my earlier draft capital in this campus draft, and obviously it hurts, but been able to fill out some talented young guys onto that roster. And, there's some individual picks, seeing how the draft board has played out. Like we're talking about pre-show, some quarterbacks, a huge run just went, and a bunch of guys went off the board that I think both you and I would have been targeting here pretty soon. So that hurts. There were some picks earlier, like, hey, I talked about Jaden Blue, but like Tez Johnson went one pick after him. And I'm kind of thinking in hindsight, I'm like, a nice wide receiver starter would be nice there, but then you got to
Yeah,
pivot. And
you went running back heavy. I mean, would you
Mhm.
take 5 running backs before you took a wide receiver? At least 4.
Yeah, probably. But then I went, Jace Brown, Bryant Wesco, Ryan Wingo, now Jeremiah Hunter. Not
Oh, I
necessarily
was
in that
so
order,
mad at
but
you. I was so mad at you for the Jeremiah Hunter. Like, who the hell? I'm the only person that ever. Me and Mike Valerie are the only people that talk about Jeremiah Hunter. And in fact, Mike, if you're listening, he sent me a trade today for Jeremiah Hunter. I don't even know who the player he was sending me was. I've never heard of that player's name, and I have a database with thousands of players in it. Never heard of that player in my life, and it was a 1-for-1 deal. Him sending me this wide receiver that I'd never heard of for Jeremiah Hunter. Like, in what world was that trade happening? Please tell me. So I don't know if he meant to add more or what. Resend it if you were, but holy crap, man. I was like, I don't know who this player is.
and it's so funny because for the longest time I've been like, yeah, Jeremiah Hunter, not nothing special. But then in the 14th round, I'm like, hey, I need wide receiver starters and guys with a potential chance, Devy Heavy, right? Potential
It's
chance to
true.
be an NFL asset. So Hunter
I
at
mean,
least flashes a little
I
bit of
can't be
that.
mad at you. I think it's a good pick.
Oh,
I
yeah.
just I was trying to play the game, and I'm finding that I just can't play the game in this draft. Like there's just too much there's too much against me. The odds are against me, and so I just have to take the players when I want, because he was on my list for quite
Mhm.
some time, and I just kept
Yeah.
looking at him and going, no one else likes Jeremiah Hunter. I don't need to take him right now, and I did need to take him right now because he's not on my team.
Exactly. And like you said, I was kind of hurting for wide receivers, but now I'm no longer at least hurting. I could definitely fill out that room, but I think everybody's rosters still need to fill out a good way. We're only in the 15th round, and there are 45 rounds in this draft, so got a ways to go.
That we do. All right. Well, we do appreciate you guys listening. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. We will be back in a couple weeks. Maybe, or like I said, we're probably going to be covering the rest of that draft at that point. Either that, or maybe we will dive into the 2027 class at that point. We just, wanted to kind of give it a little more time, and we figured that a mailbag episode would be a good one to cover. So we appreciate you guys listening. We'll be back as soon as possible, but for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out.